VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
We do thank you for joining us on Crosstalk today. Friends, on Tuesday of this week, the United States Supreme Court heard oral arguments in two consolidated landmark cases, Little v. Hecox and West Virginia v. B.P.J. Those are initials, to determine whether Idaho and West Virginia can ban gender-confused males from participating in female sports. The decision will likely have significant implications across this nation since at least 27 states have similar laws protecting women and girls. Well, joining us today to discuss these cases and their huge ramifications of the forthcoming decision, we welcome back to Crosstalk Matt Staver. Matt is the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel. He is a constitutional attorney, has 3 landmark cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. He is an author, host of the radio broadcast Faith and Freedom and Freedom's Call, and the TV broadcast Freedom Alive. Matt, thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
Thank you, Jim. Good to be with you, and Happy New Year.
And same to you. Matt, let's begin by just getting an understanding of these cases that went before the court. These were 2 separate cases that worked up through the court system separately, then consolidated before the U.S. Supreme Court. So tell us about the parties in these cases and then the substance as well.
Yeah, you have Idaho, which is the Little versus Hecox case. And that involves an Idaho law coming from 2020 called the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. And then you have the West Virginia versus B.P.J. case. And that involves West Virginia's 2021 Save Women's Sports Act, both of which protect the safety and opportunities of female athletes by barring biological males from female competitive sport teams at public schools and universities. The one case that was there by one of the states just focused on the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution. Does this classify on the basis that it violates equal protection? The second case actually has both equal protection, same argument, and Title IX, a federal law, Title IX, that actually was designed to protect and provide opportunities for women in sports. So both of those are before the court. The Idaho case, interestingly, the plaintiff in the case wanted to dismiss the case. After they won at the lower court, at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, then the Supreme Court took the case, and at that point in time, they wanted to withdraw, and they wanted to dismiss the case because they were not comfortable with where the Supreme Court might go. So that particular issue is still pending. The Supreme Court took oral argument. They did not allow them at this point to dismiss the case. Frankly, I don't think they will, but at any rate, they'll issue a decision by the end of June. This is a big case because there's nearly 30 states that have similar laws that say biological men cannot participate in girls' sports. And so if they were to overturn these cases, it would overturn over half of the state laws in the country. I believe, based upon the oral argument, we should have a victory in this case. But the argument was quite interesting, and we can talk about some of the specifics here because it was an amazing situation where on the basic issue, these attorneys for these plaintiffs that brought the case, boys that are pretending to be girls, couldn't come up with a basic definition.
Yeah, and matter of fact, you filed an amicus brief to the court stating that Title IX is based on sex, not gender identity, and this whole understanding, I mean, that's really foundational and critical to this matter, isn't it?
That is. In fact, that was some of the big issues yesterday or this week when it was argued on Tuesday of this week, and that is, does this law classify based on sex or some kind of thing called gender identity, what you want to identify? And it classifies on the basis of sex, male and female. And Title IX was designed to provide extra opportunities for females in sports. And our amicus brief focused on the fact that there's a significant biological difference between boys and girls. And we cited studies that talk about a lot of the differences, scientifically indisputable information that shows that there's a huge difference between boys and girls, men and women. And therefore, men have a competitive advantage in these kinds of athletic competitions over women. And that's why, you have this one woman volleyball player. She was playing in a game where the other opponent's team had a male, pretended to be a female, spiked the ball so hard it hit her in the head, caused a concussion, put her out of the game, put her into significant medical situations that has lifelong consequences. And that's the problem that you have when you allow these men into competitive sports. In fact, in a totally separate case, but a case that we actually interviewed one of the women who became a professional golfer, was a college golfer. Her very first game of pro, she went up against a man, and it was her and him in the final round. He had a longer reach and a stronger drive, and he was able to just barely inch her out. She would have been able to place first in her first pro tournament, but for a man that took her place.
Yeah, so, Matt, what you're pointing out is that there are inherent physiological differences between males and females, and that starts right away in life.
Yeah, it starts right away in life. And in fact, the famous situation with regards to Riley Gaines, she was a competitive swimmer, a collegiate athlete. And then you had this individual male that couldn't compete in the male sports and then jumps over to female sports and starts winning. Well, you know what? His reach is much longer, and his power is greater than the female athletes. And so even though they tied in that particular case, amazingly that Riley was able to do that, they still gave the medal to Riley. But the fact of the matter is, and we cite studies, and there's irrefutable studies, in fact, some of those came up in the argument. Some of the Solicitor Generals for the different states, Idaho and West Virginia, specifically said that nobody disputes the fact that there are differences, biological differences, significant between men and women, and particularly in the context of sports. Those are very critically manifested and obvious.
Let's hear this clip, and this is a questioning from Justice Alito.
Well, to pick up on the issue of discrimination on the basis of transgender status, let me go to some basics. Do you agree that a school may have separate teams for a category of students classified as boys and a category of students classified as girls?
Yes, Your Honor.
If it does that, then is it not necessary for there to be, for equal protection purposes, if that is challenged under the Equal Protection Clause, an understanding of what it means to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman?
Yes, Your Honor.
And what is that definition for equal protection purposes? What does it mean to be a boy or a girl or a man or a woman?
Sorry, I misunderstood your question. I think that the underlying enactment, whatever it was, the policy, the law, we'd have to have an understanding of how the state or the government was understanding that term to figure out whether or not someone was excluded. We do not have a definition for the court. And we don't take issue with we're not disputing the definition here. What we're saying is that the way it applies in practice is to exclude birth-sex males categorically from women's teams, and that there's a subset of those birth-sex males where it doesn't make sense to do so according to the state's own interest.
Well, how can a court determine whether there's discrimination on the basis of sex without knowing what sex means for equal protection purposes?
I think here we just know we basically know that that they've identified pursuant to their own statute, Lindsay qualifies as a birth-sex male, and she's being excluded categorically from the women's teams as the statute. So we're taking the statute's definitions as we find them, and we don't dispute them. We're just trying to figure out, do they create an equal protection problem?
All right. Suppose this school that has a boys, let's say, track team and a girls' track team. the school has that. And a student who has the genes and the reproductive system of a male and had those at birth and has never taken puberty blockers, never taken female hormones, never had any gender-altering or affirming surgery, says, nevertheless, I am a woman. That's who I am. Can the school say, no, you cannot participate on the girls' team?
So you're just a birth sex male who has all the advantages of birth sex male hormones, and can the school bar him from the women's team? Yes, they can.
You know, Matt, this is a very interesting exchange because Justice Alito later said that, you know, we've got to know the definition here. It could mean gender identity. It could mean whatever a state wants it to mean. It has to mean something here. Yeah. So, you know, you have this particular situation. It's quite interesting. She admits, now this is the attorney for the plaintiff that sued Idaho, Hecox. This is a male identifying, wants to be considered a female. She admits that a school could have a sports team for males and for females. She admits that if you have someone who, in their mind, wants to identify as a female, but they haven't taken puberty blockers or opposite sex hormones, or they haven't gone through surgeries, that you could exclude that person from the female team even though they identify as female. So essentially what she's saying is that if a boy begins to take, and I don't know, do they have to take puberty blockers and opposite sex hormones like estrogen? Do they have to do something to suppress their production of testosterone? She doesn't really go into that. Do they actually need surgery? She doesn't go into that. So if they actually take drugs, then they should be able to, even though they're thinking the same way, be able to participate on the female team. I mean, that makes no sense. That makes zero sense. And to say that you can't have a definition, she says, I don't have a definition. Well, the Equal Protection Clause talks about discrimination on the basis of sex, equal protection. Title IX talks about sex. What is the definition of sex? Is that biological? And she won't give a definition of it. Neither will the ACLU attorney in the West Virginia case. And was that Attorney Block?
Yeah. In fact, that attorney was asked by Chief Justice John Roberts regarding Title IX, the federal law regarding sports. And he said, now, Title IX uses the word sex. Obviously, in using the word sex, it must have a definitional meaning. How do you define the word sex? He, just like what you heard, said, we don't have a definition for it. Chief Justice John Roberts says, well, how do we apply Title IX if we don't know what sex means in Title IX? Yeah. How can we apply it? Don't we need to know what that means? And he wouldn't give an answer.
Friends, we're going to take a break here. We're talking with Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel on the Supreme Court considering the protection of women in female sports. More on this case and the public or the oral arguments that happened Tuesday. We'll have more on that in just a moment here on Crosstalk.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, Creation Seminar speaker at the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, did man come from the chimpanzee?
Chris, according to evolution, chimps and man came from a hypothetical ape-like common ancestor, the so-called missing link. Recently, an evolutionist claimed he found clues that the common ancestor of chimps and man walked upright. Therefore, the chimps who live in trees had ancestors which walked upright on the ground. Was evolution from the tree down or from the ground up? Chris, I don't think either ever happened, but you can see the lengths to which evolution must go to salvage their theory and try to accommodate new evidence. Chris, the evidence doesn't support evolution at all. Apes and men were created as is back in Genesis. There have been minor variations in both, but no evolution.
To find out more about creation science, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org.
Constitutional attorney Matt Staver with us today from Liberty Counsel. Their website is lc.org. lc.org. Friends, I recommend you sign up on their email listing. Be informed on different issues that are taking place across the country as it impacts your religious rights and First Amendment freedoms. Matt, we were just talking about the importance of understanding what this word sex means in the statutory language of Title IX. And I know Justice Kavanaugh was interviewing also Attorney Block, thinking that, in regard to this word in the anti-discrimination law, and they are seeming to imply, well, this word can be interpreted differently, allowing states to take different understandings of that in their sports leagues. And Attorney Block said, I do think that because I don't think the purpose of Title IX is to have an accurate definition of sex. And Matt, to me, that seemed crazy. We have to have an understanding of this definition. We don't need, and we also got to keep in mind, I think Title IX was 1972 when words like sexual orientation and gender identity, they were like foreign language. It was not an issue at that time.
Yeah, it was not an issue. Everyone in the 1970s, 1980s, and most of the people today, if you ask them what is the difference between male and female, what's the discrimination on the basis of sex, they would say, well, there's male and female. And sex means one thing, and it's biological. It actually manifests itself physiologically, but it is innate biologically. You are born that way. You cannot change it. It doesn't matter what you think about yourself. It doesn't matter whether you think that you're a furry, like an animal, or maybe that you want to identify as something else other than, the birth sex that God created you to be. It is what it is. And so when Title IX says you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, it has to mean something. It does mean something. And that in that case, the context is that if you have a sports team for males, like, say, basketball or volleyball, then in order to give women equal opportunity, then you need to create a team for women to give them some kind of equal opportunity as well. That's what Title IX was all about, and it has more applications as well, but it's clear that sex has a meaning. And neither attorney for the plaintiffs in Idaho nor the ACL attorney for the plaintiffs in West Virginia were willing to even come up with a definition. They said they don't have one. In fact, after the court, when the attorney for the ACLU was asked by media outside of the court, they asked him that question, and he repeated it. They asked him again, and he just turned away and walked away and refused to answer any more questions.
Wow. Matt, and so gender identity in no way changes a person's biology or their physicality, does it?
No, it doesn't change their biology or physicality. And so in the context of sports, Title IX, equal protection, particularly Title IX with regards to sports, it is based upon sex. There are completely different categories and reasons why it's clearly important to have boys' sports and girls' sports because of the difference of biology and how it actually manifests itself in males versus females. You have, like we already talked about, a physiological advantage because your DNA is, male versus female in these competitive sports. And when you put men into these competitive sports, what you do is you disadvantage the women. There are like 600 different, 600 to 800 different medals. There are 600 different women, but 800 different medals that they have lost in recent years to men who have entered into women's sports, who, by the way, when they were competing in men's sports, were not in the top echelon. They jump over to the women's sports, and lo and behold, they become the medal winners. Well, there's a reason why, and it's biologically based.
Yeah, and I mean, when we're talking about things like muscle mass, lung capacity, bone density, even length of bones, I mean, the advantage all goes to the male.
Yeah, the advantage all goes to the male. And there's, that's just the way It is. That's the way God created us, male and female, created us in His image. Yeah. There's only two. And they have different characteristics and qualities. And when you put them in the context of sports, it makes a competitive advantage or disadvantage if you mix them together. Beyond that, the problem that it creates, which wasn't part of the discussion yesterday, but it actually kind of erupted a few days before the ultimate hearing. In fact, there was a press conference by the West Virginia Attorney General, Solicitor General's office the day before the oral argument, because the plaintiff in that case, the boy who pretends to be a girl, actually was being accused by another female sport athlete who said that individual sexually harassed, provoked her in the locker room with vulgar and other kinds of outward actions. Now, he denied it, but nevertheless, that's the other issue that comes into play, where you have men invading private spaces of women. It puts them at risk, and it is just simply uncalled for. It's totally inappropriate.
Let me hear another clip from the case and have you comment. This is the justice you're going to hear in this case is Katanji Brown Jackson. Let's listen.
You have the overarching classification. You know, everybody has to be play on the team that is the same as their sex at birth. But then you have a gender identity definition that is operating within that, meaning a distinction, meaning that for cisgender girls, they can play consistent with their gender identity. For transgender girls, they can't.
So I think that, okay, so as to the part about your ability to pass over from boy to girl,
yes,
you can go from one way but not the other. I want to be clear that B.P.J. is not challenging that specific classification. I think that's important to start with. But I think, if anything, that's useful evidence as to the lack of a transgender-based discrimination, because if the legislature were just sort of unsettled by the notion of transgender athletes, I think the answer would have been to then bar them from passing over anyone consistent with their gender.
I appreciate that. I guess I was getting at the what I understood the Chief Justice to be trying to discuss, which was this notion that this is really just about the definition of who we accept that you can separate boys and girls, and we are now looking at the definition of a girl, and we're saying only people who were girl assigned at birth qualify.
Matt, I have to ask, huh?
Yeah, I know. How do you answer a question like that? So basically what you have are two girls. They're born biologically a girl. The one girl who's born biologically a girl can actually play on the girls' sports team. Well, that's a no-brainer. The other girl who is born biologically a girl, she should be able to play on the sports team too, no doubt. In fact, she can. There's nothing there. That's a problem. But that biological girl now doesn't want to play on the girls' sports team, wants to play on the boys' sports team. Well, usually it's the other way around. The boy wants to go on the girls' sports team. But that's kind of what she's talking about. So that girl who is born a girl but doesn't want to play on the girls' team but wants to play on the boys' team because she thinks she's a boy, she's disadvantaged. That's essentially what she's arguing. Mm-hmm. That is so ridiculous. I mean, it's unbelievable. So in other words, I think, therefore I am. So whatever you think, you are. Mm-hmm. So, you know, that means that if you, it doesn't matter what your biology or how you're hardwired, if you think something else, you should be able to be protected. Well, how do you come up with a definition? How do you come up with a workable standard for that? Because somebody can think anything, right? Mm-hmm. And so what if a boy wanted to play on the boys' sports and also wanted to play on the girls' sports? Why? Because he says, well, I'm born biologically a boy, so I have the right to play on the boys' sports. But I'm also thinking in my mind that I'm a girl, so I should be able to play on the girls' sports. Can that person do that? I mean, the absurdity of this, as you go down this road, is just unending.
You know, and let's just go back in time. This is the confirmation hearing from Katanji Brown Jackson when she was being considered for the Supreme Court, when she was asked, you know, what is a woman? And she couldn't define it. Here's what happened in the Senate hearing.
Can you provide a definition for the word woman? Can I provide a definition?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
I can't.
You can't?
Not in
Okay.
this context.
So you
I'm not a
believe the
biologist.
meaning of-
I can't give a definition. I'm not a biologist.
I can't because I'm not a biologist. Well, you don't need to be a biologist. I mean, all you have to do is ask a little kid, what's the difference between, is that a boy or is that a girl? Well, they'll tell you. They're not a biologist. They're even before kindergarten. They would know. I think what you have here, and, I know maybe we'll talk about the congressional testimony that just happened this week as well, because it goes right into this nonsense. Years ago, when this whole LGBTQ domestic partnership, then moving into same-sex marriage movement began to gain some steam, I said that what was ultimately at the core of this was the abolition of gender. Well, back then, people couldn't get their mind around that. How do you abolish gender? It's pretty obvious. It's male or female. But that's really what has been at the ultimate core of this. Abolish the very concept of gender, abolish the very concept of immutable sex. And why is that critically important in this debate? Because what it does is it's ultimately an attack on God who created us in his image, male and female. It's an attack on the created order. And so instead of being content with how God created us in his image, male or female, then what we do is we say, God made a mistake, put me in the wrong body, and I will recreate myself in my own image. And I'll do it through drugs and then through this excessively invasive, life-altering surgery. What that ultimately is a direct rebellion against God. And that's why this is such a worldview clash. And that's why, when we listen to some of these kinds of things, you can't even comprehend that people are thinking this way. But it is a diverse, very destructive worldview class, ultimately designed, I think, to wipe out the very notion of God. And how did this all come about? It came about back in the 1940s and 1950s with Alfred Kinsey in his book, 1948, Sexuality in the Human Male, and 1953, Sexuality in the Human Female. What did he want to do? He wanted to abolish the very concept of gender, the immutability of sex, and sexual normality. Why? Because he ultimately, as his goal, wanted to abolish in people's mind the very concept and existence of God. And how do you do that? You do it exactly in this way. When you do that, you abolish the very concept or the fact that there is God who is our creator.
Let me squeeze one more clip in. And Amy Coney Barrett, Justice, used the language of the left, some are pointing out, using the term trans girls to refer to men. Let's hear.
You're just drawing the line based on biological sex and saying that trans girls can't be on the girls' team in an age group that's prepubescent.
The record in this case does not support the notion that males lack an athletic advantage at 6 years old. That's about as early as the science goes from what's in the record. And even at that age, males have about a 5% athletic advantage over girls in most situations.
We're coming upon the break, Matt, here, but any thought on that?
I am very concerned about using that kind of language, trans girl. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean a girl. It means a boy who's pretending to be a girl. So just say it, a biological boy who pretends or wants to identify as a girl. Say it like it is, but don't use that terminology.
We're going to have one other clip from Amy Coney Barrett, and also then what Matt referred to, what happened in the U.S. Senate hearing yesterday, folks. It's staggering. You're going to hear some testimony that will just cause you to roll your eyes and shake your head. We'll be back in just a moment. This is Crosstalk on VCY America.
When it comes to eternity, most people assume they will go to heaven thinking their good deeds will outweigh their bad, and God will allow them entrance. At most funerals, people will console one another saying they are in a better place. But how do you know that? How do you know if you will be in a better place? In the book, Are You Going to a Better Place?, author Richard Schmidt presents how you can know for sure that your sins are forgiven and you are on your way to heaven. See, after you die, there will be no negotiation with God. The scriptures provide the one way today that God's justice can be satisfied, guaranteeing that you will be in an eternal dwelling place with Him. One copy of this book is available for a donation of $10, 3 copies for $25, or 5 copies for a donation of $35. Call VCY 1-800-729-9829.
Matt Staver is with us from Liberty Counsel. Matt is a constitutional attorney, and we're discussing the case before the U.S. Supreme Court. Actually, it was 2 consolidated cases, Little v. Hecox and West Virginia v. B.P.J. And let me air one other clip from Justice Barrett, and we'll have Matt comment on this as well, this taking place Tuesday at the court.
Counsel, can you explain whether or why your theory would allow a cisgender boy who just couldn't make the boys' team? I mean, he doesn't have an equal opportunity, he can't play, there's no team he can play on, and let's say that his athletic ability can be shown that he has no competitive advantage and he wants to be on the girls' team. Why can't he on your theory?
I appreciate the question. I think I just want to be clear about what we think the justification for the separate teams is. We don't think the boys' team is for better athletes and you have a backup team for athletes that aren't as good. I think the purpose of the teams is to control for the variable of sex-based advantages so that talented women athletes have all the same opportunities as talented male athletes. But also, untalented male athletes should be compared to untalented women athletes. So they're not being separated based on how good you are, right? The whole point is to allow female athletes to have all the same opportunities as men by controlling for the sex-based differential that comes through puberty. And so that's why I don't think that the claim is the same there. I think that's what's happened here is by virtue of her medical care, B.P.J. has already effectively controlled for those sex-based advantages. And so she is completely in the position that she would have been if her birth-assigned sex had been female. As opposed to a cisgender boy who's just not very good at sports. And if his birth-assigned sex were female, maybe he'd be even worse. I don't know. But again, the purpose is to control for the variable of sex to provide equality, not to have a good team and a team for people that can't cut it.
You know, Matt, this shows the importance that we must define what that term sex means.
Yeah, it really does. And then, for Justice Barrett to use the word cisgender. What is cisgender? Well, cisgender just means, you're born biologically a boy, you're a boy. You're born biologically a girl, you're a girl.
Yeah.
So just use that. I mean, don't use their made-up terminology. But that's exactly why we have to have the definition of sex. And why, you go back to 1972. Let's think about the statute. Do you think they were thinking about, well, you know what, we might have a boy who wants to identify as a girl? Maybe that should be included. No, they weren't even thinking that way. That was just, if you would have brought that up back in the 1970s, they would have said, you're out of your mind.
Yeah.
So sex means what it means, and we all know what it means. They just need to admit it.
Right. And coming up upon a clip here in just a moment, but Matt, on these consolidated cases, what is your sense of where the court is on this issue? What kind of vote would you anticipate?
I anticipate that both of the statutes will be upheld under the Equal Protection Clause, which both of them have, and also Title IX, which West Virginia has. I anticipate that it'll be 5-4, could be 6-3. I'm not sure where one of the justices stand. I certainly know where Katanji Brown and Sotomayor stand based upon their questions. That's pretty obvious. But I anticipate we're going to have at least a 5-4 decision that would uphold the laws in both of those cases. At least I'm praying. I tell you what, if it went the other way, it would be catastrophic in so many different ways.
Yep.
Because the consequences are going to be far beyond women's sports. First of all, it would destroy women's sports, which would mean if they lose this, all the nearly 30 states, those laws would be in jeopardy. And then women's sports across the board at all levels would be in jeopardy as well.
Yeah, goodbye. Goodbye to women's sports.
Yeah, goodbye. And you know what this is the erasing of women. It is the absolute opposite of what Title IX was intended to do, the absolute opposite of what the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment was entitled to accomplish.
Matt, so what's next concerning the case? Do the conference on this now?
Yeah, they will do a conference on this tomorrow. This is Thursday now, so they'll likely conference tomorrow. And at that point in time, the Chief Justice will begin the conference, and the Chief Justice will verbally state his vote and the reason why, and then it will go from the Chief Justice down to the next most senior, which will be Justice Thomas, and then move all the way down to the most recent, most junior justice, which was Katanji Brown. And at that point in time, based upon how the vote comes out, the Chief Justice will assign someone to write that opinion, and so we don't know who that might be. We can essentially guess, but it's a little bit of a guess, based upon the opinions that have been written so far. They try to, spread them out, but they also try to put them in the context of somebody who's more interested or has done more, work on that particular case. But somebody will be assigned to write the majority opinion. That majority opinion will be written, and then by the time we get to, say, May, if they haven't already released it, if it's going to be one of those that goes to the end of June, which I think this probably would, by the time we get to the first week of May, they have to submit their draft opinions, including the dissents, and that's the critical moment because even votes can change. If you go back to Obamacare, that's the week that Obamacare changed. It was originally a 5-4 vote to strike it down. There was an opinion striking it down, but it was in that first week of May that a vote was cast opposite. And so those last 3 or 4, the last part of May and then part of June, it went the other way. So it's really critical, but tomorrow they're going to get together and they will vote and pray that they vote the right way on this critically important case.
Yeah, and friends, it is critically important, and please be in prayer for the justices, even as they convene tomorrow on this very matter. Matt, I've got one more clip we want to get in before the break, and just to show the importance that we understand where this is going and what this all has turned into, now we have an OB/GYN doctor who does not know or will not admit that biological males cannot have babies. This is an astounding clip yesterday in the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. It was a hearing titled Protecting Women, Exposing the Dangers of Chemical Abortion Drugs. We have Senator Josh Hawley speaking to the so-called expert, Dr. Nisha Verma, on OB/GYN. Friends, listen to this exchange.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since you bring it up, why don't we just start there? Dr. Verma, I wasn't sure I understood your answer to Senator Moody a moment ago. Do you think that men can get pregnant?
I hesitated there because I wasn't sure where the conversation was going or what the goal was. I mean, I do take care of patients with different identities. I take care of many women. I take care of people with different identities. And so that's where I paused. I think, I wasn't sure where you were going with that.
Well, the goal is just the truth. So can men get pregnant?
Again, the reason I paused there is I'm not really sure what the goal of the question is.
The goal is just to establish a biological reality. You just said a moment ago that science and evidence should control, not politics. Absolutely. So let's just test that proposition. Can men get pregnant?
I take care of people with many identities, but
can men get pregnant?
There are many women that can get pregnant. I do take care of people that don't identify as women.
Can men get pregnant?
Again, as I'm saying,
let me just remind you what you testified to a moment ago. Science and evidence should control, not politics. Absolutely. So can men get pregnant? You're a doctor, I think.
Science and evidence should guide medicine.
Do science and evidence tell us that men can get pregnant? Biological men, can they get pregnant?
I also think yes/no questions like this are a political tool. And
no, yes/no questions are about the truth, doctor. Let's not make a mockery of this proceeding. This is about science and evidence, and I'm asking you. The United States Supreme Court just heard arguments yesterday at great length on this question. This is not a hypothetical question. This is not theoretical. It affects real people in their real lives. And you're here as an expert, called by the other side as an expert, and you've been telling us that you follow, right, you're a doctor, and you follow the science and the evidence. So I just want to know, based on the science, can men get pregnant? That's a yes or no question. It really is, I think.
I think you're trying to reduce the complexity of a lot.
I'm not. I'm trying to get, it's not complex. I'm trying to get to an answer, and I'm trying to test, frankly, your veracity as a medical professional and as a scientist. Can men get pregnant?
think you're also conflating
This is
male
extraordinary.
female with...
No, I'm not conflating male and female. They're two different things. There's biological men and there's biological women. And I want to know, can men get pregnant?
What you were talking about is biological...
You're not going to answer my question.
Biological males.
This isn't hard, doctor. Can men get pregnant? Yes or no?
Again, I would be more than happy to have a conversation with you that is not coming from a place of trying to be polarized and push.
I'm not trying to be polarizing. I'm trying to ask. I think it is extraordinary that we are here in a hearing about science and about women. And for the record, it's women who get pregnant, not men. We are here about the safety of women and science that shows that this abortion drug causes adverse health events in 11% of cases. That's 22 times greater than the FDA label, another fact you haven't acknowledged, and yet you won't even acknowledge the basic reality that biological men don't get pregnant. There's a difference between biological men and biological women. I don't know how we can take you seriously and your claims to be a person of science if you won't level with this on this basic issue. I thought we were past all of this, frankly. I can't believe we're still here talking about this.
I am a person of science, and I'm also someone here who's here to represent the complex experiences of my patients, and I don't think polarized language or questions serve that goal. I don't think they serve the American people.
It is not polarizing to say that there is a scientific difference between men and women, and I want this to be clear and for the record. It is not polarizing to say that women are a biological reality and should be treated and protected as such. That is not polarizing. That is truth. It is also, by the way, the United States Constitution, which offers unique protections to women in a variety of circumstances as women. And your refusal to recognize women as women and men as men is deeply corrosive to science, to public trust, and yes, to constitutional protections for women as women. And I think it's extraordinary that you would sit here and advance a political agenda that has been thoroughly discredited and rejected by the American people in this forum. And I'm glad we had this exchange because it is exceptionally clarifying. It is also in many ways quite depressing. I see that my time has nearly expired. I just want to thank the other witnesses for being here. Thank you for protecting women and children. Thank you for your valiant efforts. Thank you for following the science.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Matt, it's time for someone to go back to medical school or what?
And I was just saying to other people that in our office, how can you graduate from medical school when you can't answer the basic question, can men get pregnant? I mean, that's a medical graduate? I mean, what are they teaching in medical school? I mean, this is just nonsense. Yeah. He says, can biological men get pregnant? And she won't answer that question. You know, I was talking to Anita, my wife, and I said, another kind of line of question he could ask is, do you treat people in your practice that identify as a furry? If you're treating people who identify as the opposite sex, do you treat somebody who identifies as a furry? Well, she probably does, because that's the same mental disorder. And if that's the case, can a cat give birth to a human being?
We're going to pick up with this right after the break. Friends, let's open our phone lines as well. A critical Supreme Court hearing earlier this week. Oral arguments. Our number to crosstalk. Your questions, your brief comments, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. Back in a minute here on Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewtube.com. Can I challenge you for 2026 to study with me or on your own the book of Daniel? On Sunday night, I started my verse-by-verse study through the book of Daniel. We just finished up Revelation after a year and a half. Daniel is such a wonderful book. Not only is it the foundation for Revelation, but Daniel is confronting many things we confront today, such as living for God in a pagan culture. How about persecution? You've heard of course, the fiery furnace, the lion's den, but yet also how to be an example to the unbeliever, even pagan leaders. The book of Daniel is one of the most attacked books because of predictive prophecy. The experts, so-called, want to bring it 400 years into the future to say that it's history, not predictive prophecy. But we know that it was written before the events occurred, showing the supernatural nature of God's word. This year, study, will you, the book of Daniel. I'm Brandon House.
This is Crosstalk on VCY America, friends. We encourage your prayers for the United States Supreme Court as they come to conference tomorrow to make their decision known internally. And we, the public, will not find out likely until June of 2026 what that decision is. Be praying for them. But, Matt, further comments here about that exchange that you heard between Senator Josh Hawley and the expert testimony of Dr. Nisha Verma on OBGYN.
Yeah, and of course, expert, I would use that with quotes because she claims to be an expert, but she doesn't know the basic biology that men, biological men, cannot get pregnant.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Senator Josh Hawley had a lot of other questions, but he couldn't get past the basic one, the simple one. And he said, can men get pregnant? But then he actually used the word biology in front of it. Can biological men get pregnant? And even to that very specific question, she would not give an answer other than, oh, well, she has these complexities and she has women that she treats, yes, but she has other people who don't identify as women. I guess they're getting pregnant. Well, are they women? No, they're biological. Are they men? They're biological women. They're not men. So it's just absolutely absurd. But again, how did we get to this point?
Yeah.
Where basic science is just thrown out the window. And these are the people, by the way, that you see that have taken over different kinds of counseling, American Medical Association with the medical doctors, American Psychiatric, American Psychological Association.
And we got packed phone lines here, but let me just say this. If the justices rule the wrong way in this case, Matt, there's no bottom to this issue.
There's no bottom.
Yeah.
That kind of discussion that you just had would become legalized, and for you to actually do the question that Josh Hollywood did just now, it would be considered, discriminatory and against the law.
Let's go to Bruce in Huron, South Dakota. Bruce, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Matt, how is she allowed to hold a medical license when she can't even define that simple term? Yeah. It just seems crazy, I would think if you could be disbarred from the medical or the legal, you should be able to do something like that on the medical.
Sadly, she's probably well in line with the AMA, in their thinking on this.
Yeah, that's right. Unfortunately, this is the reform that needs to happen within the medical and psychological, psychiatric counseling realm as well.
Thank you, Bruce. Holly in Venice, Florida, you're on the air.
Hi, I'm sorry. It's just so hard to wrap myself around this and how far we've come in America. But, I'm sure that a vet goes to school for less time than a medical doctor. And a vet never questions whether an animal is male or female. And I just wanted some input on what you thought of that.
Yeah.
Why can't we just be
That's a good point. Yeah, they don't ask the animal how do they identify. They just look at it, just like we used to do. And we still do for the most part, except for some people like this OBGYN who can't even determine reality.
Thanks, Holly from Venice, Florida. Let's go next to Drew in New Mexico. Drew, you're on the air.
I was kind of like on the same note there as the last caller. In the animal kingdom, all animals, they're biologically made the way, so it's not a no-brainer to figure out which species can get pregnant or not. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Drew, for the call. From Drew, we go to Dewey in Monticello, Kentucky. You're on the air.
Yes, sir. I was going to say that, first of all, God bless y'all for what you do. Appreciate you. I figure that one way to help her to understand which is a male or a female is for a male to sue her for losing his child. I think she could figure that out real quick then.
Yeah. Thank you, Dewey, for that. It's bizarre. And Matt, this is, the very same things we're hearing before the Supreme Court yesterday. They cannot come up with a definition. What is male? What is female?
Yeah, it's the same thing that we're hearing before. The attorneys for the plaintiffs in Idaho and West Virginia, the ACLU attorney, they couldn't come up with a definition of sex. What this does is it is the abolition of absolute objective reality. And when you do that, then there's no basis to make any argument, no basis to have any rational decision or dialogue. They've just simply abolished the concept of objective reality, and they've done it in the very most obvious relationship, and that is between a man and a woman, or the manifestation of a male and female.
We have Paul calling next from Cameron, Wisconsin. Paul, you're on the air.
Yes, Jim, thanks for taking my call. Yes, it is that we really already have no bottom to this gender identity crisis. We already have 134 different gender identities declared. And what it is, I think it will be that we have to not at all assimilate with people that do have these gender identities problems, simply that when we do want to witness to them, we have to investigate what these...
well, they need guidance. They need spiritual counsel.
Yeah, and what you have here, for those that are going through this, I mean, it's always been, until recently, classified as a mental disorder. It is a mental disorder. And it is ultimately also a lie. Some people are just told a lie. But what we can't do is have the government, the society, make it a law that you have to affirm this, because that's really what's at issue here. And there's a whole cadre of people that think this way, amazingly. And if they ever get power, they will force you to think that way under penalty of law.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Let's squeeze in Jeff in Stockton, Missouri. You're on the air, Jeff.
Yes, Jim and Matt, thank you all for what you do. And I just wanted to state that all these doctors and all these highfalutin people that claim they don't know and they can't describe what a man or a woman is, they're just liars. And all this bunk is just underlinement to push the homosexual agenda. That's all I had to say. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Matt,
it's an absolute lie. And at the end of the day, they know it or should know it. But it's an absolute lie. There's no way that you cannot know what a male or female is.
Friends, Matt Staver with us today from Liberty Counsel. Their website, lc.org. Sign up for their email alerts, and you'll find out so much helpful information on their site. Their number, 407-875-1776. And Matt, thank you so much for joining us today on the broadcast.
Thank you for having me. Good to be with you, and Happy New Year again, Jim, and all the listeners.
Great. Thank you as well, Matt. Look forward to the next time. And friends, again, be praying for the justices as they convene tomorrow, and will be making their internal determination and then assigning who it is that's going to write the opinions, and very critical case that's before us. God bless you, friends. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.